First off, we want to say hi and thank you so much for joining us for our first webinar in our Run Your Business Better monthly webinar series. As you know, we value you, and here at TaraByte, we wanted to provide you the resources to help you run your business better. Our first guest speaker is someone we consider an expert in their field. Russ Graff from NETSTOCK has nearly 30 years of experience with ERP and accounting software. He has built 2 successful ERP VAR businesses and has been involved with over 1,000 ERP implementations. For the last 5 years, Russ has been the VP of Sales for NETSTOCK, a demand planning app designed for the mid-market. Later on, we'll have founder and president of TaraByte Solutions, Gene Terzevitz, come in and say a few words to our audience. Okay, Russ, please share about NETSTOCK and about yourself, and then we can jump into our webinar.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think you've covered it pretty well. Just been in this game a long time and seen a lot of different things. Worked with hundreds and hundreds of different small, medium-sized businesses implementing full-blown ERP and accounting systems. And yeah, as you mentioned, the last 5 years really focused specifically on the inventory side. And so, yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to present to you all today. Thank you for your time. And focus for the next 30 or 40 minutes or so, fairly fast-paced conversation that we'll launch. And as Stephanie mentioned, there is a Q&A dialog box or function within the Zoom tool that we would love to have you log your questions there as you have them. You might want to wait a little bit as we get into that to see if it's maybe a standard thing that we would address in our presentation. But if you get near the end and you've got a nagging question, please feel free to log it there, and we should have time at the end to address those as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So at NETSTOCK, we work with small, medium-sized businesses across North America and really around the globe for that matter. And these are all inventory-based businesses, so distributors, manufacturers, retailers, and increasingly more and more what we would call e-tailers, just e-commerce focused businesses. And for the most part, many of those businesses that we deal with, the value of the inventory that they're carrying on the books is really the largest asset on the balance sheet. You know, some of them may have some real estate holdings and so forth that might be a larger number, but either way, certainly the inventory is what's core to their business. It's all about buying, selling, making, and moving that inventory to best advantage. So clearly managing that well is really critical to overall profitability. And again, our whole focus at NETSTOCK and my focus in all my career has really been in that what we call SMBs, right? Small, medium-sized businesses, and that's really the core of what we're talking about here today. And so when we work with those companies, the question that's obvious is, so how do we manage this critical asset? What are we doing today to understand what's going on with our inventory? And certainly most firms have some sort of an accounting or ERP application like QuickBooks as an example, and there's probably 50 of them in North America market alone that are pretty prominent, that you see hundreds and thousands of users of each of these individual applications. QuickBooks clearly is one of the dominant ones for sure, especially in the smaller end of the medium market. And often there's also third-party add-ons added to that. So a tool like Fishbowl, for example, would be considered perhaps a third-party add-on to that core QuickBooks environment. And then in addition to that, we often see other tools in the mix, and Excel and spreadsheets are generally one of the other dominant tools that we see in use. And so we're going to talk about those things today. But before I dive too deeply into that topic, I just want to create a little bit of context here, because there's really a difference between inventory control and inventory replenishment, right? Sometimes we use this term inventory management, and I consider that to be sort of an umbrella term or a broader concept that's really broken down into these two components, control and replenishment. And on the inventory control side, this is usually what we actually think of when somebody says the phrase inventory management. Our minds tend to go towards what is really the inventory control function or aspect of inventory management, which is the physical product, right? Managing the movement, receiving the shipping, picking and packing, hopefully doing cycle counts of your most important items on a regular basis, and oftentimes leveraging tools like scanners and barcodes and so forth, handheld devices, to help manage and make that more efficient, right? So I can capture accurately and efficiently all those transactions that are going all day long in my ERP or accounting application. So that's obviously a critical piece, right? You've got to know what you have, where it is, and in what quantities. Absolutely have to have accurate information there. And Fishbowl does an excellent job of this aspect of inventory management. But it's not the whole story, of course, right? There's that other flip side of the coin, which we call inventory replenishment, or sometimes you'll hear the phrase inventory optimization. That's a term that we use at NETSTOCK quite a bit. So that's kind of the flip side of the coin. And this is really the piece that helps us understand, is it the right stuff? So now Fishbowl and the inventory control functions have told us what we have and where it is and how much we have, but it doesn't tell us necessarily if it's the right stuff. And so we really need to know, is that the right product at the right place at the right time in the right quantities? And that's based on a couple of other really key inputs into that thought process, right? What do we expect our demand to be? Are we able to forecast or predict what our future demand is going to be for those items? Do we understand when to place an order and how much to order based on things like lead times and how my suppliers are performing and so forth? And then do I have a sense of which items are most important to me and prioritizing what's going on? So all these pieces really help understand how to run the business better, right? This webinar series that we're talking about here is part of what TaraByte is doing for you, which by the way is great that they would make that effort. This is, on the inventory side, this is a really key piece of how I can run the business better if I can get my arms around this whole replenishment or optimization function. And this is the component or the piece that we find a lot of small, medium-sized businesses are using Excel or other spreadsheets, Google Sheets, whatever it might be, but typically today it's Excel, to really try to solve this problem, to really get their arms around that challenge. How do I know how much to buy and when to buy it and so forth? And let's understand, what those issues are and what the impact is on the firm if inventory is not optimized, if you haven't done a great job of managing this challenge. Three key results that we run into all the time. The first one is stocking out of product, right? We tend to run out of things, especially, unfortunately, our most popular and probably our most profitable items are the things that tend to run out first if we haven't gotten ahead of this. Or secondly, and conversely, accumulating too much of other stock. So we find this all the time where companies are running out of some things and have way too much of other things. And then there's just an awful lot of wasted time and effort from the folks that are trying to manage sort of those two competing interests. How do I have enough but not too much, right? And if you don't have a good visibility and understanding of what's going on, there's just an awful lot of wasted time and effort, a lot of stress involved that affects the productivity of the team that's working on those aspects. So clearly the worst thing that can happen is running out of product when a customer has need, right? Customer comes to you, wants to place an order, and you can't fill the order. Not only do you risk losing that sale if the customer goes elsewhere to find what he or she needs, but if that person has a positive experience with your competitor, you may also lose that customer altogether, right? So there's a lot of risk involved in stocking out of a product. When there's a demand for it. And in today's Amazon-driven world of expectations, right, everybody expects that you all are going to behave just like Amazon does, and I might have a drone delivering this thing to me this afternoon, right, in 2 hours. So, I mean, we've created these unrealistic expectations for all distributors and retailers and manufacturers, and so it's really hard to recover from not meeting those expectations. And you all have experienced it, I'm sure. Customer loyalty is not what it once was, right? You might get one grace period from folks, but if this were to happen on a regular basis, you can be sure that the loyalty is not there. Customers are going to go elsewhere. So that's the big problem. And unfortunately, the way that most firms solve that problem with a lack of other better methods is simply by buying too much. And there's not necessarily a great understanding of the impact of that, the downside costs of having too much inventory, which of course is our focus today in this presentation. And as I mentioned, the productivity piece is a real challenge as well. And a lot of times in the smaller firms, it's often an owner or an executive level person in the company that's doing a lot of the buying. We've certainly experienced that a lot with the implementation we've done at NETSTOCK. And so, if I can make that owner or that highly valuable person more productive in my firm, that's going to be pretty critical to my profitability as well. But we're going to focus today on this concept of excess stock. And as I mentioned, the easy solution to the stock out problem is simply to overbuy, and that results in some pretty direct costs and impacts. And it's just bottom line, it's a profit eater. It can really have an impact on the profitability of the business. And again, in our competitive world that we're in, margins tend to run pretty thin, and there's a lot of risk there. So we better be efficient and able to really manage this, and that's the problem. So one thing that I think it's important to understand is the difference between what we would call safety stock or buffer stock and excess stock. A lot of times we hear this phrase just-in-time inventory. And in an ideal world, if I had consistent demand for my product, I knew I sold one SKU, one quantity of SKU ABC every single day, and I could place an order today and have it tomorrow, and I could buy one a day. I would have no need. That's a perfect just-in-time. I would have no need for a safety or a buffer stock. But obviously, that's not reality. The fact is, we live in a world of complex supply chains and lots of different factors in that, lots of risks and processes involved in the supply chain. So we have to have this safety stock or buffer stock to manage those things like my replenishment cycle. How often do I want to buy something, right? And I've got minimum order quantities and other vendor imposed restrictions there. I've got lead times that I need to understand, and how are my suppliers performing in that regard. What's the seasonality of the item, or other fluctuations perhaps in the demand, if there are some things that are seasonal or that I can understand in my marketplace that create those fluctuations. So it needs to understand those things if I'm going to create a proper safety stock. But it also needs to accommodate some risk factors like supplier performance, right? My supplier says he has a 2-week lead time or a 4-week lead time, but is that really how that supplier is performing? Is it sometimes less than that, sometimes more than that? How often? How much derivation is there from that standard? And I need to understand that and measure that, because that's going to have an impact on how much buffer stock. If I've got an unreliable supplier, and sometimes that lead time stretches from 3 to 5 or 6 weeks, then I better have enough inventory on hand to cover that gap or to minimize that risk, right? Same is true with my forecast. If it's difficult for me to predict what my demand is going to be for an item, then I've got to have a little bit more safety stock to manage that risk. If it's very predictable and I know exactly what's going on, then I need less because I can manage it. I understand it better. So there's a number of different things that go into that safety stock, and the key is that it's a planned policy, right? This is intentional. We say to ourselves, okay, I want to have 10 cases of product XYZ on the shelf at all times as my safety stock, and that's what I'm going to buy to, because I understand all these factors in my supply chain, and so it's a conscious effort to understand that. Excess stock is not that. It's the result. It's just extra inventory on top of that safety stock that really is the result of a lack of insight and understanding in the supply chain. It's not policy driven at all. It's really just haphazard and ad hoc, and it's a result of the inability to define a proper safety stock and have the proper insights. So the lack of analytics and visibility in that area creates a very hazy picture, and again, the easy way out is to simply overbuy. And that creates, again, its own risks and costs. So let's talk about those. The first thing, and which to me is really the biggest problem in this, is that it's tying up all kinds of cash, right? There's working capital tied up in inventory sitting on the warehouse shelves. We've had customers say, gathering dust, right? So think of it, envision that as a stack of cash sitting there gathering dust. So there's some really serious money that could be used elsewhere in the firm to fund other profit-creating initiatives, right? Who on this call does not struggle with managing cash flow? As far as I know, every small, medium-sized business does. We do at NETSTOCK, and every company that I've ever installed an ERP system in, that was, cash is king. You've heard that phrase many times. You probably used it. So everybody struggles with this concept of managing cash flow. And yet there we have this stash of cash sitting in our warehouse right now that could be put to better use. So to me, that's the biggest issue, but it's almost a little bit intangible, right? There are also other hard costs which are very tangible, which are called carrying costs. So things like I got to pay property taxes on that inventory at year end. I've got to have insurance that covers it. I've got a shrinkage in my inventory through things like breakage or obsolescence, depending on what kinds of products that I sell. I may have expiration dates and so forth, or if it's technology-oriented stuff, it just gets obsolete very quickly and out of date. And so, not to mention I'm paying rent for the space that it's taking up. I've got folks in my warehouse that are having to count it and move it around and spend time on it. So there's a labor cost. So most experts will peg that cost as, anywhere from 20 to 25% of the value of the inventory as what are called carrying costs. So that's significant actual out-of-pocket costs. So there's really two key components and costs associated with that excess stock: tying up cash that could be used elsewhere, and then the actual hard carrying costs. And so the question then becomes, where do you stand on this, right? And let's do some quick kind of back of the envelope math on it. Again, we often find, 20, 30% in the excess inventory is very common. But let's just say for some easy math and to be conservative, let's use a 10% figure. And if we assume you've got, say, $1 million, again, for easy math, $1 million in inventory on the books at 10%, that means you very conservatively have $100,000 in excess inventory. That's a lot of cash sitting there doing nothing for you, right? And on top of that, if we use a conservative 20% carrying cost model, that's $20,000, 20% of that 100K, as hard cost dollars out the door every month. It's almost $1,700 a month in that case, just needlessly, every month, every year, spending that money and not getting any benefit out of it. And again, this is pretty conservative math. It's more likely twice these numbers or more. So, what would you guess your number is? Do you think you're at 15% of excess, 20%? We tend to ask that question when we're talking to companies, and we get feedback all the time with, gosh, I know it's at least 20%, right? So people have a sense that this is a challenge and a problem for them. But now if you apply some of this math to it and think about it in these terms, what could you do with that extra cash? It may bring it home to you a little bit more. And then there's the question, so what do I do to address it, right? So, okay, now I've come to the understanding and realization that I've got the problem. What do I do to address it? We've actually written a number of blog posts on it. We give live presentations at conferences and so forth. And we actually built an email-based crash course, we call it, just on the topic of how to action your excess inventory. But there are some things you can do. And first, you need to leverage all the great data that's captured in Fishbowl, right? That's your source of truth. You've got the information, you've got data there as to what your quantities on hand are. You've got other good information that you should be able to slice and dice. And if you struggle with that, the folks at TaraByte can certainly help you do that analysis. But you just need to kind of dig it out, right? Identify where the excess is, in what items. It's typically in a couple of key items, and then take some action. So, put it on sale, have a fire sale to get rid of it. It's just, maybe you can send some back to your supplier if you've got a good relationship and it's a product that's not going obsolete. The nature of the item is that way. Maybe you can send some back to your supplier, negotiate something there, even if it's 50 cents on the dollar or whatever. Maybe sell it to a friendly competitor in another geography that doesn't impact you. But somebody on the other coast that sells the same product, maybe you could give them a deal and do them a favor and get rid of it. But do something. You've got to get that out of your warehouse, clean it out, take the hit, and be done with it. And especially the slower moving stuff, right? I mean, if it's a fast moving item, relatively popular item, you may be able to live with the normal attrition that item will have and gradually work it down. But especially the slower moving items, you just, we would recommend you just simply take the hit, feel the pain once, get rid of it. And then proactively going forward, it's really important that you look for purchase orders that might be out there for those same items right now, and we would call those surplus orders, right? If you've got excess of an item and you also have a PO coming in, when that PO arises, it's going to just make the excess worse. So identify those things, go take a look, make sure you don't have purchase orders out there. And if you do, kill those or delay those the best you can. And then from a preventative standpoint, now you need to develop and implement that coherent safety stock policy, right? So that you can get ahead of, get ahead of that curve. If I can understand what that proper safety or buffer stock is, now that drives how much I buy and when I buy it. And with each of those steps, we certainly focus hard on prioritizing the items, right? Understand the nature of the items in your inventory the best you can, which ones move the quickest, which ones have the most value or the most profit to you. And if you end up with a list of 100 items that you identify as being in excess, prioritize those and work your way down the list, right? Tackle those first 5 or 10 this week or this month, tackle the next 5 or 10 the next week or next month, and work your way through that so that you're working on the items that have the biggest impact on profitability first. So that prioritizing is key. So when you do minimize that excess and free up that capital and save all those hard costs, what happens? Well, only good stuff, right? I now have the ability to launch new initiatives, invest in more equipment or people, maybe develop new products or markets that I want to go into, do some additional marketing. Imagine all the projects that you have right now in your business that are essentially on hold for lack of money, right, for lack of cash. And so now all those things become open to you and become possible because you've saved the cash and you've moved into that, you've really freed up all that working capital. So there's just so much you can do, and it's really exciting. We recently did a success story and actually did a video with a customer of ours by name of True Audio in southern Utah. There's a picture of Justin there as the logistics director. And it's a great story, great little company. Within about 9 months of deploying the NETSTOCK application in their organization, they freed up nearly $1 million. I think it went from, I want to say 3.5 million to about 2.6 million in stock value. And by the way, while improving their fill rate to their customers, right? So they not only had too much, like most, they also were running out of other things. So they improved their customer service and reduced their excess stock. But then the cool thing was that what they used that extra cash for mostly was for R&D, which allowed them to release 3 new products to the market and help them leapfrog the competition. So think about the multiplier effect of that money. It's really incredible. It's not just that I found this cash sitting on the warehouse shelf, but what I did with that allowed me to accelerate the business, right? Just an incredible story. And they couldn't be happier about the whole thing. And it's not an uncommon story. They happen to be one that we sort of highlighted and was able to document, but we hear it all the time. And we're now approaching 1,400 companies around the globe, about 800 of those in North America. So we have a lot of businesses that we've worked with over the last 8 years that we've been a business. And this is a very consistent story. It's a really common problem that companies are simply using the wrong tool to try to solve the problem. And usually that's Excel, right? In the case of True Audio and in most businesses and all of you on this call, you've got a very capable ERP environment. They had good data at True Audio, but just like you do, but they were then using Excel to try to do the replenishment piece of the business, forecasting their demand, developing these safety stocks, deciding what to buy, and it led to exactly the problems that we've discussed, right? The excess, the stockouts, and then all the time consumption in trying to figure out what's going on. So with spreadsheets and other tools, it's just the wrong tool, and it's really common. And I understand why it's so common, right? After all, Excel is pretty much sitting on almost everybody's desk. There's no out-of-pocket cost for it. Relatively easy to use. Most people understand the interface because Microsoft's done a great job of making that very consistent with all their Office products. And we all probably have at least one Excel wizard on the team or somewhere in our inner circle of friends or contacts. And so in theory, they can build some really amazing formulas and worksheets. Maybe that's you in your organization. Maybe you know someone like that. And so it's very tempting. It's to a great degree intuitive and logical to think that, okay, let's use Excel to try to figure this out to solve this problem. But the reality is it's not inexpensive. There are a lot of hidden costs associated with using a spreadsheet. And let me talk about a few of those. Again, we've done a whole series of blogs and done entire webinars just on this topic alone. But at a high level, the first challenge is the data, right? You've got to figure out where the data is stored in these various applications, whether it's in QuickBooks or Fishbowl or whatever ERP some of you may be on if you're not there yet. Those accounting systems and so forth have multiple data files spread throughout the database. There's my purchasing and my inventory items and my sales histories, and maybe I'm doing some kitting or assembly or bills of materials are associated somewhere. So I've got to grab all that data. First of all, identify where it is and what the formats are and all that. So it's a little bit technical, but you can get there. And then the next piece is, how do I extract the data? What are the tools available to me to get the data out? And then the timing of that extraction, right? If I come in the morning and pull down all my inventory tables, and that takes 5 or 10 minutes for it to move and load, then I get an interruption, or I go get a cup of coffee, then I bring down my purchase order files, and you can see where I'm going. All of a sudden, those tables, as I'm pulling them out, are already out of whack because I've got people concurrently doing transaction entry. So now they're already out of sync. Or do I have to come in late at night or early in the morning or on a Saturday morning or something and have that quality of life impact just so that I can get on the system when nobody else is, or kick people off when I'm trying to get the data and so forth. So a real challenge that way. Big issue for me is a risk factor of who's in control of that data. Is that one person in the organization? Now, if that's the owner, that's okay because I'm probably not at risk of losing that person, but it's also the question, is that the highest and best use for that owner's time? Is that really what they should be doing, is messing with data and spreadsheets? That's another topic for another day. But if it's not the owner, if it's an employee in the organization, there's some risk there. What if that person, obviously they're going to take some time off and they may be ill and take vacations, but what even worse, if they leave the organization, has anyone else been trained on it? Does anybody else know what the formulas mean? If you've ever picked up somebody else's spreadsheet, you know how challenging it is. It's like reading somebody else's programming. It's not easy to figure out the flow and the, what's going on from one worksheet to the next. This company, True Audio, that I referenced earlier, I think they had 95 columns wide on the spreadsheet, and of course hundreds and hundreds of lines long, one for every SKU, and multiple warehouses. And it was just a nightmare to try to understand what the data flow and the formulas were. And it's almost good news when you get an error in the formula, because at least now you have something wrong. The challenge is a lot of formulas don't necessarily error out in Excel, but they're wrong, and now you're getting wrong calculations and wrong data that you're using to make decisions with. Then there's all kinds of other additional inputs. We talked about the whole safety stock challenge and lead time challenge. And even if you think you got it nailed, it's an ever-changing environment. Things change. New items get created. New vendors come on the scene. New processes in the warehouse. So there's just so many complications and challenges with trying to use a spreadsheet that seems like a logical, low-cost approach, but it really is a challenge and very expensive. So no matter what manual or semi-manual tool or process that you're using to manage this concept of replenishment and optimization, the goal is really to get what we call an optimal order, right? I want to understand what I need to buy and when I need to buy it, how much I need to buy at exactly the right amount of product and the right amount at the right time. That's really what the goal is. So the concept of creating the optimal purchase order as quickly and easily as possible is what you're after. That's the nirvana. And so what you need is a tool that allows you to do that, to accurately and easily leverage the strengths of Fishbowl and all that great data that you've captured and take it to the next level of visibility in the organization. So, and when you find the right tool, you know it, right? Because it covers all these things we've talked about, and it works seamlessly with all that great data coming from QuickBooks and Fishbowl. But even if you have the right tool, and there are a variety of different systems and applications out there, it still might not work for you if either implementation is too difficult, it's too expensive, it's just not affordable out of pocket, but it's too hard to use, it's hard to get up and running. If your team doesn't agree to use it fully, right, there's some change management that has to go on and, separating, making the transition from that spreadsheet that probably somebody in the firm has a lot of pride of ownership in, and they've worked hard to build it and hone it over the years. And I get that, but I would view that as a great interim step. It's a great way to have a good understanding. It's better than not having it, perhaps, right? And it's done its job for you. It's been it's provided its service, but it's now time to move on. And sometimes that change management can be difficult. Again, that's a great use of Gene and the folks at TaraByte, because they really understand your business. They're a trusted advisor. They've been many times with you, many cases for years, and really understand your business. Let them help lead the change management process in the organization, because if it doesn't come top down from ownership, and if it's not accepted from the bottom up as, yeah, this is a tool we've got to use and trust it and go, we're going to make this change, and it's for great reasons, right? And we're just going to have to make this work, then it still might be the right tool, but still not going to get deployed and get to the impact that you're looking for. So let's talk about a tool, of course, we love at NETSTOCK, and it's the application that we built. We built an inventory replenishment tool that's cloud-based, that really delivers all these best practices approaches through a very user-friendly, easy-to-deploy application. We've got, again, decades of experience. The NETSTOCK company is about 8 years old, but the 4 founders of the business have worked together in prior businesses over the years, over 20, 25 years in some cases, in 1 or 2 different companies that they've built and sold. And all those businesses were around supply chain and demand planning and inventory replenishment and optimization, mostly for bigger firms. They work with some very large multinational organizations. We're a global company ourselves. We were originally founded in South Africa, and we've got operations in the UK and Germany and Australia. So we've worked with some very large multinationals with very complex supply chains for decades. So they're literally world-class gurus in this topic. There's nothing that you could ask them or work or present to them that they haven't dealt with one way or another. When they came together to build the NETSTOCK application and the company around it, they knew at that point, some 8-9 years ago, that the world had changed to the point where the small, medium-sized businesses had just as much complexity in many cases in their supply chain as the big guys have always had, buying product from overseas with longer lead times, trying to fill containers, ocean containers and so forth, selling through an omni-channel environment, online, directly through distributors, maybe through Amazon or other internet stores, maybe using third-party logistics and other third-party warehousing to get closer to your markets and move product around. So, I mean, those small businesses now had some real complexity and were hampered by a lack of tools. So they saw the opportunity, and they saw that the internet was really now the way to deliver that application to that business, so they could do it very cost effectively and quickly. And so the whole concept of us building the NETSTOCK model was to say, we can take all this we've learned, glean it down into an application that's easy to deploy and easy to use, and really target and price it accordingly and so forth for the middle market. So that's what we've done. We've built this cloud-based, so it's any browser application, right, on demand, anytime, anywhere. We've already built the integration to Fishbowl with the help of Jean and her team. So we've got a working integration that's seamless. And the product itself is dashboard-driven, graphical color, interactive, very intuitive to manage. And we really work hard on building that management by exception, right? That prioritization that I talked about really helped me understand which items are causing the most pain and where I can have the biggest impact by rectifying the challenge with those. And then through use of the cloud and the internet deployment model, we don't have to come on site with expensive consultants. We can do it all remotely. And we can build in a kind of this subscription model of pricing, so we can really have a very low cost of entry. And for that matter, easy exit. If for some reason it doesn't work for you, you're not tied into long-term contracts and so forth, so you can get in and out quickly and easily. And it just really makes an awful lot of sense for the market that we've targeted. And I think that's you folks on this call and maybe listening to this recording later. So let me just spend a couple minutes showing you some quick screenshots, and then we'll bring it to a close here and then open it up for questions. And so I thought I would just show some screens instead of going into a full-blown live demo. If this looks interesting to you, more than happy to schedule that with you. You can work through Jean to get that coordinated. more than happy to talk with you individually. But just to give you a feel at a high level, this is that initial dashboard that you would log into as a user. So you come into the NETSTOCK app, and this is 6 of 9 different widgets or key performance indicators that we have exposed on the dashboard. And again, as a web cloud-based application, every one of our nearly 1,400 customers or companies around the globe are in exactly the same version every single day, right? There's no version control challenges, which makes, again, support very easy for us, and therefore is reflected in lower cost, right? We don't have to have armies of people managing all these different versions and all the different integrations to all the different ERPs that we connect to and so forth. It's just not an issue. So you get a very clean dashboard screen. You can see, again, it's colorful, it's graphical, it's showing you trend lines across the top. How am I doing in each of these key areas, and what's the trend look like? It's identifying a total picture for where do I stand. So, for example, if you can see this on your screen, this upper middle panel is one we call excess. So let's focus on that, since that's what we've been talking about today. It's telling me that I've got $9.5 million worth of excess inventory spread across some 2,500 items. So I got a big problem, right? And there's no way I can tackle 2,500 items today or this week or maybe even this year. That's a lot. So now help me prioritize those and understand. So here's what we call our top 5 list of items that are driving the biggest pain here or representing the largest value of this. So 5 items are representing over $500,000 worth of this $9.5 million problem. Right? So focus on those. What can I do about those? I can drill into them individually from here. I can drill into the full report from this upper header here. And I can do some slicing and dicing and analysis and see what's going on with each of these items and dig deeper. But this exposes that to me very quickly as to where do I stand. And then not only that, we talked about surplus orders. I've got another 473 items on order on their way into my dock right now that when they arrive are going to contribute another $6 million to my excess problem. Why would I do that to myself, right? And here's the top 5 items. So let's go look at that item, see what PO or multiple POs that item is on, and call my vendor and delay that order or kill that order. Conversely, here's where I'm already stocked out, and here's where I'm about to stock out. I've got inventory on hand, but based on our projections of future demand and lead times and all those things that we talked about, I can predict with pretty good certainty that I've got another 44 items that I'm about to run out of before their next shipment arrives. And it could cost me another $388,000 in lost sales, right, based on the demand for those items. So now I can see what's going on with those and maybe expedite those orders, maybe pay for a little faster shipping or whatever, understand, or if there's no PO already created, get one going. So just the visibility and the proactive nature of this. I've heard some terms recently. One is called predictive analytics, and then there's prescriptive analytics. So that's really what we're looking at here, fancy terms to say I can predict what's going to happen, and not only that, I can now make recommendations as to how to solve what I think is going to happen. And so that visibility is huge. We talked about prioritization. One of the things that we do is we classify all the inventory items, not only by an ABC ranking in terms of value, but also in a low, medium, high measurement of speed of movement or velocity. And we combine those views into this 9-box color-coded matrix here. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner, these guys are color-coded in green. These are my high-value, fast-moving items. That's my bread and butter in my business, right? As opposed to these ones down here in the lower left in red, slow-moving, low-cost items. I might even question why I stock these if I could have a vendor manage those for me if I've got reasonable lead times. Or just buy 2 big bulk purchases of it, since they're low cost anyway, and put them in the corner of the warehouse and be done with it, not spend any time on it. And these colors, I'll go back to screen, those are the things that are showing up on my top 5 list on my dashboards, right? So these guys down here in green in my potential stock out list, yikes, I want to solve that problem right away. And if I do that, tomorrow I get a fresh top 5 list in my dashboard, the next day another fresh top 5 list. And if I can keep working on even just those every day, I can't help but see these trend lines, these graphs, these bar charts going the right direction, reducing my excess stock, reducing my stock outs, increasing my fill rates to my customers, getting closer to my ideal model, right? This is just a quick glimpse of our item forecasting screen. So you can see I've got all the historical information coming in from Fishbowl and QuickBooks. And then I've got the ability to project future demand here with the ability as a buyer or planner in the company to amend that forecast. So this is what the computer algorithms are predicting. There's 15 very sophisticated algorithms kind of under the hood in the NETSTOCK application that can help me look at seasonal patterns and all kinds of standard deviations, et cetera, some pretty fancy math. And it says, okay, based on all that, here's what we expect the future demand to be for this item. But now as a buyer, if I know some other external information, something from my sales team or something happening in the marketplace, I can make amendments to that and adjust it manually to have it reflect my new buying program as a result of those changes and keep track of those changes and how we did. And then the last screen here before I conclude for the day is just our ordering, what we call our order schedule. So this is, again, that prescriptive analytic piece, right? So based on all the analysis, the shorthand of what our lead time and safety stock and all that stuff, what's on hand in other locations if I've got multiple warehouses, how we classify it, what its current status is, all this stuff says, okay, we're recommending you buy 112 units of this item at a cost of $78 a piece. That's a $8,800 line item. And then here's another line item and another line item. These all go on one purchase order. And again, as a buyer, I can understand these numbers. I can see where the recommendation came from. I can override that recommendation if I know something the system didn't. But more often than not, people are just trusting these numbers as they get comfortable with the system. You say, yep, that makes sense. Yep, that makes sense. Maybe I'll add an item to fill a container, whatever, and then push a button and it goes and creates the open PO for me without having to rekey it. So this is kind of my work area where I can get all the data I need, all the visibility I need to make good, quick decisions, what I need to buy, and click a button, and it's created, and then it follows its normal processes in Fishbowl to execute. So just a couple of glimpses into what the application looks like. Again, you can see the nature of it is very colorful and graphical, makes it really intuitive and easy to implement and so forth. And I think that's a great example of the right tool, right? We have a hashtag that we use sometimes in our social media, hashtag ditch the spreadsheets. So if you're out there and you're one of those folks that are using a spreadsheet to try to solve the problem, this I would ask you to consider an alternative approach that would just make a huge game-changing impact on your business. So I want to thank you all again for attending. There's my contact information. If you want to get to me directly, I'd be happy to have a chat with you. You might prefer to actually start start the process with the folks at TaraByte and then get us involved, but would happy to have another conversation with you. And I guess, so again, thanks for your time and attention today. Hope that was useful and informative. And with that, Stephanie, I'll send it back over to you to see if you've got any questions that have been coming into the questions panel. And if you haven't done that yet, but you still have an issue, feel free now to go ahead and enter the Q&A question and answer dialog box there, and I'll stick around for a few minutes and see if we can answer any questions. And I think, Jean, did you have some comments as well?
I'm here, and I'm ready and waiting to answer any and all Fishbowl questions
There you
within
go.
reason.
Some you may have to take offline.
That's very true.
Yeah. So are we seeing anything in the question panel, Stephanie?
Nope, not yet. But also, if you have any, you can go ahead and place in the comments if you want.
Russ, you got a couple of nice thank yous.
Well, good.
Oh, yes, we did. Yes, for Russ. Thank you so much, Russ, by the way. You gave us a lot of valuable information for,
my pleasure.
For our audience here.
You can probably tell I'm passionate about it. I've just seen it change businesses for the better over the 5 years I've been with NETSTOCK. I'm a believer, right? And I just want to do more to help people understand where this fits and how doable this is. It's not pie in the sky. It's something we're doing every single day.
So I actually have a question. So how does the pricing look for NETSTOCK? Like if someone in the audience was interested in talking with you about this, can you kind of give us an idea about that?
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple of key components to it. We kind of break it into two pieces. There's what we call a one-time activation fee, which is the full onboarding process. And as you can imagine, with as many of these as we've done, we have a very well-refined methodology for onboarding folks into the application. Can go from as quickly as 2 weeks to maybe 4 or 6 weeks. Is I guess the typical model. So it can go very quickly. So we've got a very well-defined methodology, and so that one-time activation fee covers that whole process from startup to go live and so forth, and getting you going. And so there's a one-time fee there, and then there's either a monthly or an annual subscription to subscribe to the service. This is called software as a service, or SaaS, is the model we follow. And both the activation and the subscription scale based on the size of the inventory, the value of the inventory. So unlimited number of users, warehouses, SKUs, none of that matters in terms of the pricing. It's all about the value of the inventory. So if somebody's at that $1 million mark, that's one price. If they're at 5 million, that's a higher price. If it's a $500,000, it's a lower price. And I think most of our typical end users are somewhere in the, I would say, maybe $3,000 to $5,000 is the one-time activation, and maybe $400 or $500 a month for the use of the tool. So if you think about that quick math that we did, where I could literally free up hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and maybe save myself hundreds and thousands of dollars a month, every month in carrying costs, it's a very rapid payback. So it scales based on the size of the inventory value.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's the kind of question Jenna Jones had. Thank you for asking, Jenna. What about, so a lot of our main client base is targeted around Fishbowl. So one question I have here is, like, what does Fishbowl do for replenishment on its own compared to NETSTOCK?
Yeah, Gene, that's probably best in your court.
Well, Fishbowl has its, algorithms where we can do min-max by location group, aka warehouse, location site. And it has an auto-generation of POs and an auto-generation of manufacturing orders. But what Fishbowl comes in a little short out with is the concept of time. Fishbowl's algorithms don't really take in that concept of time, whereas with NETSTOCK, they actually have algorithms that say if you're buying from Asia, you've got to load up, and place all your orders before Chinese New Year's hits and everybody takes the month off on vacation.
Right.
So Fishbowl, looks at what is in the system, but both demand and supply at the moment, but it hasn't been fleshed out with those time horizons that really, make or break your system.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good assessment, Gene. And just, the sophistication of the algorithms that we've built in go well beyond min and max, right? They take in all those other factors. So it just takes it to a whole nother level.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that, Gene, and for your input there, Russ. Does anyone else in the audience have any questions for Russ or Gene? Please input them in the questions box or in the comment section.
And obviously, if you think of something after we conclude and give this a little bit of thought, maybe talk in your organization about some things we've discussed today. If something else comes up, please, you know how to get a hold of us. Don't hesitate.
Okay,
we're here to serve.
While I wait for maybe a couple more questions, I'll go ahead and maybe ask one that some people might have. For NETSTOCK, what does the implementation process look like?
Yeah, and I kind of alluded to it a little bit. So we've got a pretty well-refined methodology that we start with what we call a get-to-know-you session, right? So who are the players in both organizations that are going to be involved in the deployment? And it's not a big full-blown project plan or anything very elaborate. It's pretty, we try to keep things simple. We built an application that's easy and simple to use, and we try to make our company easy to do business with. Right, a very simple contract that we go through and a pretty simple methodology, but it's complete. So we start with that get to know you process, who's going to be involved, what's our timeline, what's our targets, what are we trying to accomplish, what's the goal, what are the pain points that brought us to this point, right? And then we quickly install the application and we get our first dashboard. So those first couple of phases go very quickly within a matter of a couple of days, really, of signing on with us. And then the third piece and the middle piece of the process is really where the bulk of the activity is, and we call that the refine component, where now we've got our first dashboard and now we're doing some sanity checks with it, right? How's the quality of the data? Is it looking the way we want? Do we need to do some tweaking of the data extracts? Are there certain warehouses we don't need or do need? Are there certain product lines that we're going to exclude and not worry about? So there's a lot of data refinement, maybe some user-defined fields and ways that we can group items to think about them in certain ways that we want to forecast based on that. So that refinement phase is probably the bulk of the activity. And we're doing that with what we call a custodian, a key individual that knows the business, can make the decisions for the organization. And then once we get it refined and tested and we're ready to go, then we roll it out to any additional users with proper training and say, okay, here's the model, here's how this is going to work. And then we just go into a support mode. So we've got, I think, 3 or 4 regularly scheduled coaching sessions. We want to do that data test. And then when we place that first order using the order schedule, we want to go through that review process with them, make sure they understand how that order piece works and why the numbers are what they are. And I don't recall if I mentioned this in the presentation earlier. I don't think I did, but I've literally in the last 10 days, in fact, just earlier today, was on the phone with the second person that said to us almost verbatim, once we trusted the numbers, this thing really took off for us. And so there we find there's a tipping point that people get to, and usually it's with that ordering process. When they trust that order recommendation and let the system do what it does, even if it's maybe a little bit nerve-wracking, hey, that didn't match what my spreadsheet said, but I'm going to trust it, that's when people hit that tipping point. And I literally heard it twice in the last 10 days. When we did that, this thing turned itself on for us and really changed our business. And we lost 30% of our excess inventory and increased our fill rate. I mean, we just hear those testimonials all the time. So I think that's a key piece of the implementation, is that refinement and then get through that first order. So again, that's usually, we've seen it as fast as 2 weeks, but more likely for most distribution companies, we're looking at more like 4 to 6 weeks to get to that point.
Okay, so we have.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
If we have a new product without any history and what have you in Fishbowl, but we have a production plan and a forecast, can we add that to NETSTOCK and let it drive?
You bet. Yep, absolutely. And we actually, I showed you that dashboard with the 6 widgets on it. The next 3 underneath that I didn't have in my screenshot, one of those is what we call our new SKUs, or new items. So we do segregate those. We want to highlight those because of the challenge of forecasting with those. So we give those some special treatment. But yes, you just go in and create a manual forecast to get you started, and then you track that closely to see how it's doing. And once you've got about 3 to 6 months of activity and history with it, the algorithms start to get better and better at predicting future demand. But yes, you can load that manually up front.
Great. I have a client that needs that right now.
There you go.
Okay, so now Matt had a question for you. Could you discuss the item classification breakdown further? Does value refer to the unit cost or total inventory? Is velocity relative, or are there some set standards of how quickly stock cycles?
Yeah, great questions. I can tell you're thinking about that the right way. Yeah, so we out of the box we follow the 80-20 rule, right? So 80% of the items, and then 16% of the items, and then the final 4%. So that's my A, B, C, and high, medium, low. But those parameters can be tweaked as part of our configuration and refinement phase in the implementation. That's one of the things we look at. So we have an out-of-the-box standard, and then those can be modified and tweaked. And we also can look at value based on cost or margin. And I think there's a third factor in there as well. So those are all configurable environments that we can tweak and make fit your particular business model depending on how you think about inventory. So I think that answered the question, but great question.
Yes, thank you, Russ, and thank you, Matt, for asking that. Okay, well, I think that's it. Jean, do you have anything you want to add in here?
Just remember we're here. We do custom reports. We do custom integrations. We can make Fishbowl talk to all sorts of different external programs. So keep us in mind.
Yeah, and for me, just thanks again, and Gene and TaraByte, I really appreciate the opportunity. I think that, you know, a series of webinars that you're putting together to help businesses just become more effective and efficient is a great service that you're offering to your team. I'm happy to be associated with you guys. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you again, and we appreciate all that you've offered here in this webinar. Just want to announce, since you did mention our webinar series, our next webinar will be on April 23rd, and that will be about cloud hosting for QuickBooks. So I'm going to send out an email after this webinar to remind you of that, and then also give you more of Russ's contact information. And then if you were too shy to ask a question, you can go ahead and email me, and then we'll go ahead and send that to Russ himself. Take care.
Minor correction, cloud hosting for QuickBooks and Fishbowl.
Correct. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you.